It's almost National Sew a Jelly Roll Day. The best day of the year, right? So every year for this national holiday, I've designed a quilt that uses only a jelly roll. These quilts are always really fun, really fast, just kind of a nice palette cleanser in between maybe more complicated projects or as a one-day project if you want to celebrate the holiday. So this year I designed this, the Tilted Jelly Roll. I've chosen this old jelly roll that I've had forever. It's from a line called Flow that came out quite a while ago, and I really love the colors, these kind of aquas and pinks and oranges and grays with that white. It just really makes my heart happy. So I've chosen 2 jelly roll strips to get us started, and the first thing I'm going to do is just sew them right sides together along that really long edge. So just a 1/4 of an inch seam, 40 inches. See you in a minute. So when I am sewing my strips together here, I don't take the time to pin. It's a relatively long seam and I know I'll end up just poking myself with pins. So I just sew about 6 or 8 inches and then just off screen, my fingers are just kind of aligning the next chunk of the strips together. And then I feed those through the machine and then I repeat all the way along the length of the 40-inch strip. Once I finished sewing, I gave my strips a quick press. Usually I am a press open kind of person, but in this case, there's really no intersecting seams in this quilt. So I pressed all of my seams to the dark side fabric, and it certainly did speed up the whole process. So my jelly roll strips are all sewn together into one long pair, and now it's time to cut them into 3 12.5-inch lengths. I'm going to head over to my big cutting table and do that. You will have about 6 inches or so left over from your strips. I don't know exactly what I'm planning for them yet, but I am keeping them. So you can just set them aside, add them to your scrap bin, whatever makes you happy. To cut down my strips, I used a 12.5-inch square ruler, which is the ruler I'll be using to trim the blocks down at the end, so I already had it out. I'm just aligning it to get a nice straight edge. And then when I use this square ruler, I use one of the lines that goes all the way across the ruler to align that seam line that goes down the middle of the strip. And then I can just cut on the other side of the ruler and I have a perfect 12.5-inch strip. And then I can repeat that 3 times across the strip set. And I end up with a little 6.5-inch piece left over. And you can see kind of my pile here that I've been collecting as I went. My strips are cut down, and now we are just going to sew them together again. The only trick here is to make sure you're alternating your colors so that you're not sewing the same color to itself. But this is simple, just right sides together, sew a 12.5-inch seam. Again, I'm not pinning here as I run these 12.5-inch strip sets through my machine, but if you have an issue with your machine where it kind of gathers one material, either the top or the bottom, a little bit more than the other, then you might want to use some pins just to keep your edges even. You could press this now, or you could go ahead and sew all of the seams together. I'm going to go ahead and sew them both because there's no intersecting seams here. So you can save yourself that little trip to your ironing board. Now that all of my strips are sewn together, it's time to press them. And it is a little awkward to do it here, but I just take kind of one pair at a time, pressing that new seam to the dark side. And then once my block is all pressed, it's time to trim it down. Our block is almost done. It's 12.5 inches now, and if you wanted to, you could just leave it like this and sew them all together. You'd end up with a slightly larger than the measurements I've given here striped quilt, but we're gonna go do a little bit of magic with our ruler. Now it's time to turn our simple striped block into a wonky tilted block. I've laid my block here and then aligned my 12.5-inch square ruler so that the tip of the ruler and the 2 11-inch marks are all touching the outer edges of the block. So it only fits one way. So once you have those 3 points aligned, then you are just going to trim off those 2 kind of triangular shaped scraps. Once that's done, you can rotate your block around and cut it square using the 11-inch marks on your ruler. You're going to align those to the corner of the block, and then you're going to have kind of the same shaped scraps to cut off, 2 little skinny triangles. And here's our block, 11 inches, all done, perfectly tilty, fun striped block. So our block is all trimmed up and done. It currently measures 11 inches and it will be 10.5 inches in our quilt. I'm going to go ahead and make the rest of the blocks and then we're going to arrange them. So when I am arranging blocks and I don't have a ton of space, I fold each block into a pretty small little segment, quarters or 6 or whatever, as long as I can see some of each of the fabrics in the block. And then I just lay it out. At this point, I'm just getting them all down. And then once they're all kind of arranged in the layout called for in the pattern, then I can start swapping around blocks to get a really nice kind of color arrangement of the quilt. Honestly, I don't put a lot of time or stress into arranging the colors in the quilt. I'll move prints that are right next to the same print in the next block, but I don't spend a lot of time here. I just kind of get them down and start sewing. Once I am happy with my arrangement, I'll grab a rainbow of Wonder Clips, and then I will take each row of the quilt that I've laid out and stack it up so that I can grab the top 2 blocks and sew them together, and then add the 3rd block and then the 4th block. And once those blocks are all stacked in the order I want to sew them, then I will grab the first Wonder Clip in the rainbow and clip it in the top left corner. There's no significance to the top left corner, it's just I always choose the same corner. So I've clipped these with red, now I'll pick up the next stack, arrange them all stacked up in the order I'll sew them, and then I'll clip those together with the orange clip, and then I'll just progress down the quilt rows. My blocks are all arranged and clipped together in rainbow order so I know which way to work. Now, as I finish each row, I will put this clip back into the top left corner of that row so I don't get it mixed up. And then as I sew the rows together, I'll remove the clips. I'm going to go ahead and sew all these blocks into a quilt top and then we can get it quilted and finished. So it has been a few days and my Jelly Roll quilt is just about done. I need to finish hand stitching the binding down to the backing, but we're gonna call it good. This quilt finished at 42 by 52.5 inches, and I really love it. It's a small throw, but we were working with just a jelly roll, so that is really gonna limit the size of the quilt that you can make. If you wanted to make this quilt bigger, you could use 2 jelly rolls, or instead of using 2 of your jelly roll strips to make a block, you could cut solid fabric and do 1 jelly roll strip with 1 solid color fabric to make like a background for your quilt. I bound mine with this aqua and blue striped fabric that really almost perfectly matches the back. I was able to use a little remnant of this great tulip pink bananas sateen backing since I had quilted another kind of small quilt on that same backing, so I had a pretty sizable remnant left over. And since this is a small quilt, it worked out perfectly. So if you're looking to get a quilt totally done start to finish, then this is a great contender. I also have a couple of other Jelly Roll quilt patterns up on my channel. I will put a link to those here somewhere, a little playlist to the Jelly Roll content. And I will also be back in a week with another quilty video. So until then, happy quilting!